Awesome. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to hear from some law enforcement professionals on how to sustain a career in law enforcement today. So as you can see on the side of your screen, you should have our go-to webinar panel. If you're having issues with audio, there's a section to help with that. You can even call in if that's easier. And then as well as the chat section, we will be hosting a question and answer at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions or comments throughout, please submit them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions for our experts, we want to be able to answer those. And then lastly, since we get this question a lot, we just want to remind you that our presentation and a recording of this will be sent out tomorrow. So if you want the slides or you want to be able to share the recording with other members of the agency, we will be emailing that out tomorrow. So let's go ahead and introduce. I am Vanessa, and I will be helping moderate this webinar. I'm on the marketing team. I help with the campaigns, and I've been here for about 1.5 years.
Hey everyone, my name's William. I'm excited to be here with you all today. I'm a content marketing specialist here at Power DMS by NeoGov, and I collaborated on the report that will be part of the resources you get with the slide deck today.
Hello, Andy Hendrickson, Director of Law Enforcement Strategy. Pretty new. I just joined NeoGov in January, and I was consulting with them since last September. I just retired from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department here in Las Vegas, Nevada in December. So it's only been about 7 months there. I spent about almost 28 years. Held a few positions as a sergeant over the academy, then a lieutenant over our organizational development bureau that focused on professional standards and training from defensive tactics to scenario-based training, to active assailant training, and emergency vehicle operations course, along with firearms. So I was happy to join, and I got out. You can see I've got the standard issued retirement beard going now.
Hey everyone, my name is Chase Breeden. I am the lead implementation consultant here at Power DMS for the Professional Standards Suite. Like Andy, I came to Power DMS or NeoGov with prior law enforcement experience. I spent about 7 years working patrol and canine at Greenville Police Department and Aiken Public Safety in South Carolina. And just like Andy, I also have the beard going on.
Great, we're super excited to hear from you guys. So let's do a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, we'll talk about kind of the expectations, motivations of first getting the badge. We'll then transition into kind of the reality of the job, the different things you guys deal with day to day. And then kind of the bulk of the webinar will be different strategies for career longevity and the best things, best tips and tricks that you can kind of apply to your life to sustain your career. So first, we kind of want to start with some data. So as you can see here, this is from a survey of about 1,700 officers across the country. But these are kind of the top 3 reasons that they decided to join law enforcement. So you can see most popular was people wanted a career that was interesting and exciting. They wanted to serve people in their community, or they have seen police interactions and they also wanted to do something that would serve the citizens that they live among. So those are kind of the top 3 that we've seen. And let's go to Chase for this one. We'd love to know, like, what kind of motivated you to join law enforcement?
Thanks, Vanessa. So I'm kind of all 3. I can remember at an early age growing up and having canine handlers come demonstrate at my school and thinking it was just the coolest thing I had ever seen. I remember growing up in a family where everyone kind of worked in public service, military family, those kinds of things. And I knew I wanted to give back to my community in some way. So when I moved to South Carolina at a young age, I kind of wanted to stay here and be a police officer in the state. And I thought, you know, at the end of the day, it's also a really exciting job. The day's never the same. It's always something different. So I kind of hit all 3 of those bullet points of why I wanted to become a law enforcement officer.
Awesome. I love that. So yeah, on our next set of data, we kind of go into what happens along the way. So since they joined like their agency, they probably had a couple different roles, but along the way, we can see out of this survey from 10,000 officers that only 7% of them would recommend to someone else to become a cop. So as you can see, a large majority of these people have become detractors of their own profession. And there's kind of a clear attitude shift that does occur. So Andy, from your experience in the field, do you feel like you can relate to this data?
Definitely, looking back, like Chase said, why he joined, and it does run in the family. For our police department here, the LVMPD, my father-in-law, my father, and my wife and myself all had a stint at some point. So just the four of us alone probably have 80+ years invested with the police department. But with that said, I have 3 daughters. I have triplets that are now 24 years old, and I have one that's getting ready to be hired by the police department, but not in the law enforcement role. I don't think I would encourage them to go into it now. Would I do it all over again? Absolutely. I had a blessed career. It was a great agency. The opportunities I was exposed to, I would do it over. I just don't know if, well, I'm thinking about it. My dad told me not to do it too. He told me to become a firefighter. He said everybody likes firefighters, and I didn't listen to him. So it's a hard one to struggle with, but I can tell you it's definitely a rewarding, and I don't think I fall into that category of where I would try to deter others. I know I've constantly been recruiting those to try to come on, but I just don't know if I would push my daughters into it.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, thanks for the input. So as we can see from the data that we just went over, there's usually a clear shift from the expectation of the job, getting the badge, going through academy, into like the reality of the job. Maybe you've been there a couple years, you've been there 10 years plus, but you can kind of see on these lists, you kind of go from being optimistic, motivated, you kind of have an idea of what the job's going to be like. And then when the reality of the job kicks in, it comes with its own set of, stress, life changes, effects on you, maybe your family, things like that. So this is kind of what we want to dig into, like what causes that shift and maybe some things that you can apply to your life to maybe help mitigate or help with the kind of reality hit of your day-to-day tasks. So yeah, we want to dive into another set of data really quick. This one is from kind of a overview of about 13,000 patrol officer resumes and kind of seeing like when they switched from their kind of law enforcement role to something separate. But you can see from this data that between 1 and 2 years, that's about when most officers have decided to maybe switch careers or switch roles specifically. But you could see that also there's a large group that have stayed 11+ years. So we kind of want to focus on that longevity, maybe what can keep you around for that long, how you can kind of progress in your career like that. But we also want to hear from you guys. So we're going to launch a poll, but we want to know if you can maybe note a time where you feel like maybe your attitude towards the job shifted. So let's go ahead and launch that. But please feel free to submit your answer here. We're just curious to see what you guys think. We'll just get a few more seconds for that. Awesome. Let's go ahead and show the results. Okay, so as you can see, 1 to 10 years is the bulk of the response. 5 to 10 years, I think, is pretty common among other officers, other lieutenants, sergeants, people of that nature. But yeah, no, that totally correlates with what we are talking about today. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to transition to the strategies.
Yeah, hi everyone again. So looking at that data, now we're going to dive into the question above on your screen here. How do you sustain a law enforcement career for 20+ years and retire with your physical and mental health intact? And I know Andy has some thoughts he'd like to share before we dive in, so I'm going to pass it over to him.
Thanks. I was curious about the results. Obviously, looking at this, I recognize a cynical change in myself at 5 to 7 years. So I think that was 45% that popped up, almost half. And that's actually where I think a majority of it is it first initiated. And then I noticed it again later on in my career. And how I battled it was challenging myself to try something new, maybe even it was another assignment or a promotion. I waited till about 10, 11 years on to promote to sergeant. And then I waited about another, I don't know, 8 years before I decided to promote to lieutenant. I wanted to become an expert in some areas, but I found those changes. And then when I was an FTO, I had those conversations with my new trainees. When they were fresh on and out of the academy, is having them try to understand that the profession changes you, and it doesn't have to be a bad change. It's just going to change how you deal with things, how you look at things. You need to change on how you deal with it yourself. So one of the things we did when I was a sergeant at the academy is we had a book that we handed out. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. Basically, it's a guide for the officers and their families. And Dr. Kevin Gilmartin explains some of the processes you go through. And I've had an opportunity to actually listen to him present and speak when our agency brought him in a couple times. Each recruit received this book and was discussed with them. We wanted them to be aware of those challenges and the changes that they're going to experience, and their family members to understand that as well. I can tell you when I read the book, I had a refresher. I pulled it out again to read it before this webinar, and it brought some chuckles to me. I saw myself as a person he described. I kind of made fun of myself and I laughed, and I'm like, man, that's me. As recent as coming back from Dallas a couple of weeks ago on the airplane, and I'm like, people trying to rush past you to get down the aisle once you get to the gate here at the airport. And I'm like, this is bullshit. Everybody's being assholes. And that's what he references in the book. And I'm like, my wife's like, it's okay. And I'm like, man, I've been retired for almost 6 months and I'm still using the phrase bullshit and asshole. So if you read the book, you'll understand, excuse the language, it's in there, but it's, I recommend it. I think we're going to put a link to it at the end. I don't get anything for it. It's just something that really helped ground me and kind of prepare me. And I go back and reference it to try to help me deal with the challenges that we're faced in the profession.
That's really great. And for someone with as long a career as you to look at it as a resource that's valuable, I think that's really worth sharing. And as Andy mentioned, we're going to link to that at the end in a resources page that'll be part of the slide deck. So be sure to check that out. Now we're just going to delve into what are the things that can help officers sustain long careers. And the first one we're going to look at is maintaining physical health. And I think we all know, civilians and those working in law enforcement, we're all aware of the fact that health is important. But when you look at stats like these on your screen, it shows just how much of a priority health needs to be for law enforcement specifically. And often we don't really think of maintaining good fitness, nutrition, and sleep as things that provide protective benefits, but they actually do prevent and significantly reduce the risk for a lot of health issues. So I know Chase is going to delve into some specific things that worked for him, specifically as a patrol officer here. So excited to hear from you, Chase, on this topic.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, so I'd like to dive into all three of these things and just break them down as some things that helped me and things that I've seen other officers or other agencies utilize that have really helped their officers or their deputies. First one starts with fitness, right? So maintaining that constant routine, getting out of the squad car, moving, stretching, walking when possible. Sometimes that's not possible. My first agency, it wasn't anything for me to go call to call all the time. I mean, it wasn't anything for me to always be working a call, do a report, go to the next one. And so I had to find time outside of work to bring in that fitness, so I wasn't, getting overweight because I'm working night shift. I'm switching every 2 weeks between days and nights, and I don't have time to pack a lunch, so I just go and eat at the gas station. So finding a workout that works for you, that doesn't mean you have to go do cardio all the time. It doesn't mean you have to go lift heavy weights. I like lifting heavy, but at the same time, I like making sure I have other alternatives in there. So one of the things I've also done is gone to yoga. It's a little different. It's a little crunchy granola sometimes if you want to be hyper masculine and say that's not for me. I actually really enjoy it. It's really a great way to just change your pace, change your layout, and just have some other alternatives in there. So there's other ways you can do that too, just from meditation, calisthenics, stretching. Ultimately, it comes down to if you look good, if you feel good about yourself, it kind of helps this holistic approach of not just being in shape, which can help you in your law enforcement career, but it affects everything else in your life as well. So you're going to tie that into nutrition, and ultimately at the end of the day, it ties into your sleep as well. Now, one of the things I've seen work for some departments, adequate department gyms are great. I've worked for agencies where they provided some fitness incentives, like they pay for your gym membership. That's great. I've talked to some other ones where they put gyms in all of their substations and even gone so far as to add wellness incentives, like giving all of their officers Whoop bands to monitor their health rates, their sleep schedule, things like that. just so they can keep this total holistic approach to fitness because they understand the importance for their officers throughout the longevity of their career. Now, that's not the end all be all. There's some great things out there. You're welcome to find your own, find what works for you. These are just some of the things that have worked for me. Moving on to the nutrition aspect, I know it's really easy to go to fast food when you're working on shift. It's really easy to just go to the places that offer you great discounts. I'm one of the first people to go to Chick-fil-A because, one, I love Chick-fil-A, it's delicious, but at the same time, it was nice to get half off or even free meals while you're at Chick-fil-A, right? It's a great incentive, a great thing about being a police officer. But one of the things I found myself doing, especially when I worked night shift, because I was big into DUI hunting, is I was always drinking energy drinks. I was always drinking, chips, anything that I could eat that probably wasn't really good for me, lots of junk food. So one thing I tried to do or change pace was replacing things like potato chips, for example, with other alternatives that still kind of satisfied that hunger for crunchy. So even things like almonds or nuts, any kind of crunch, or even rice cakes, you're not adding in those terrible calories for you, but just changing what you're eating, as long as you're still meeting what your body's kind of craving, it kind of fills the gap for you. One thing that I really also liked is just meal prepping. I know not everyone wants to eat chicken, rice, and broccoli for every meal, but that was really big for me when I was working 120 hours every 2 weeks. It was really big for me to just make a bunch of chicken, rice, broccoli, any kind of vegetable, and have that in a cooler at work, heat it up, eat it real quick in 20, 30 minutes, and go back to work. Now, at the end of the day, that saved me a lot in finances as well, because I'm not spending money eating out, but it also was just good food for me. Instead of eating a burger from the local Five Guys or something every shift, it worked out really well long-term for both finances and nutrition, and kind of tied back into my fitness schedule. And then finally, you have sleep routines, which I think everyone can relate to is the hardest thing to do in law enforcement, especially when you switch shifts. Like I've said before, the first agency I worked for switched between days and nights every 2 weeks. You weren't given the option, that's what you did. So as soon as you got on your night shift schedule, it was back to day shift, and you were finishing your shift at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, and you were back at work Monday at 6 a.m. So you didn't really have any time to turn around, and the one day you had off kind of to sleep, you're also missing time with your family. So it's really difficult. I had to find a lot of ways to actually make that work for me. I've pretty much done everything under the sun, from blackout curtains to noise machines. Recently started using weighted blankets to help with sleep. That's a pretty crazy alternative that I had never considered before, but it helped me a lot. There's also medication. I've tried melatonin before. For me, it didn't work, but some people it does. One of the things the doctor prescribed to me when dealing with PTSD was trazodone. Didn't give me the headache, didn't give me the sleepiness throughout the day or drowsiness throughout the day like melatonin did. So just good alternatives, but obviously talk to your doctor about what can work for you. Now, one thing I'd like to promote to anyone who's an admin or an administrator in here that's listening is consider how often you're switching your schedules. When I switched departments and I moved to every 6 weeks, it improved my life tenfold. I wasn't switching every 2 weeks, so sleeping was a lot easier. My day-to-day life was a lot easier when I was off duty, because I wasn't stressing about how I was going to get enough sleep for the next day or stay awake all night for the next shift. It didn't really matter. So just things to consider. Even consider shift bids. If you do something like a 2-week cycle, you may want to consider alternatives that can help your officers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andy. Maybe he has some insights into this and where he can also give us some information.
Thanks, Chase. I mean, I think you covered almost everything. I can just tell you, though, I can't looking back on my career, I don't know if I ever hit all three all at the same time for a consistent length of time. So you might find it difficult to, to equally apply each of these three areas at the same time. Don't get frustrated. Try for two and be prepared for them to change over time. I know sleep was the one that was probably the most difficult. I spent probably a third of my shift, or good close to that percentage, on graveyard. Although we didn't change every 6 weeks. Ours, we would bid. We were there for a year, but my wife also worked graveyard, so it kind of worked out for us. But something, if I put emphasis on one, it always seemed like I took away from the other somehow. So if you can at least shoot for two of the three, you're on the right path, and you'll kind of see how they'll shift around sometimes on there.
That's great advice. Thank you both. We're going to move on to the next section, which I think, all of these things intertwine, I think, but we're going to talk about stress management and mental wellness next. So just some stats on your screen. So obviously, we all know officers confront stressful situations consistently in the field. It's part of the job. But I think without effective ways for stress management, the cumulative effects, can be really disruptive in your life. So we know for a lot of officers, there's a stigma involved around getting support. There's a worry about consequences, and sometimes there's a lack of access to effective tools that can help them manage stress. So these are just some stats that show just how prevalent stress is, as I'm sure seems obvious, but can be very glaring when presented like this. So I know that Chase has spent some time thinking about and doing preventative and proactive stress management. So he's going to chat about a few techniques and strategies that have worked for him today.
Thanks, Will. So a little bit of background on my career in law enforcement before I dive into this topic. I only spent 8 years on the road, 7 years on the road. So obviously I didn't retire from law enforcement. I'm not a vested law enforcement officer, but that doesn't change the impact my career had on my life in terms of mental health and mental wellness and things I have to deal with. I was exposed or involved in 2 officer-involved shootings, as well as many other critical incidents that you could probably imagine what they are. So it was a short career, but as my sergeant told me when I left, it was about the equivalent of 15 years worth of work in 7 years. So I've seen a lot. So I like to think that when it comes to dealing with the things from law enforcement and how it affects your mental health, I've got a lot of experience with it. Now, what I say may not work for other people, but this is what's worked for me. So one of the things I've noticed when I first started was I didn't have any access or any real variety to any kind of employee assistance plans. My department provided us with an EAP. It was 3 meetings with the psychiatrist that they chose for you. There was no other alternatives. You only got to meet with that one. And after 3 meetings, it was your requirement to pay for it. So there wasn't really any help. It takes, if any of you have been to therapy, you understand that it takes a little longer than 3 meetings with someone, 1, to get a feel for them and understand that you probably feel comfortable talking with them about that event, but 2, to really get into the nitty gritty of what you're dealing with and coping with. So one thing that's worked for me, or, I think can work for other agencies, is setting up those procedures and those processes in place for the officers just from the get-go in a convenient way for them to find themselves. I had to go through my command staff to get help on the EAP anyway. So if it was something personal I was dealing with, or something I didn't really want to share with anyone else because I didn't want to be viewed as maybe being weak or dealing with the stigma that we have in law enforcement around mental health help, it didn't matter. I had to go to my supervisor, who had to take it to the lieutenant, I had to take it to the captain to even approve for me to go through this process. So we really want to streamline that process and make it available to an officer or a deputy without the need to have everyone in their business. It just doesn't help. So defining those procedures, those processes early and making them readily available to people will help a lot and help address those challenges. One thing I also like to bring up, and it's not always feasible, is you don't want to take away their sense of identity. One of the reasons I didn't like talking about what happened to me or talking about the events that I went through was because I didn't want to be stuck on a desk where I didn't have my badge and gun, because to me, being a law enforcement officer was my identity. I had come in at 21, thought this is what I'm going to do for 28 years, get my pension and go do something else. I viewed it entirely as I just have to get through this, survive my career, which we'll talk about again later, is probably not the best way to view this. Moving on to easy to use. We want it to be uncomplicated to get that mental health break. I can tell you, in one of the events where one of my partners almost lost their life, he was expected to be back at work the next day. There was no time off for him. He was not given time off. It was, all right, we'll come back tomorrow and take your calls. We're short-staffed. There wasn't any decompression time. And we would go a lot of times, it was a very violent city, we'd go a lot of times from critical incident to critical incident and have absolutely no time to decompress from one shooting to another.
Wow.
Just things to consider. There's really not a good fix for it, not anything that I can tell you, but those are things we want to consider, especially as administrators or law enforcement officers trying to make a change in how we do things, is how do we make it so that there's some kind of decompression time between these critical events and the officers going back in the field. One thing that I found worked really well for me, and it sounds crazy, is I would play really calming music on the way to critical incidents. So if you ever watch any of my vehicle pursuits or even any of my code runs to robberies or shootings, there's probably jazz in the background. And at Christmas time, there's Christmas music in the background, which I just think is probably hilarious to me, but it helped calm me down because it reminded me of simpler times when everything was just a lot easier. The other
Wow.
thing that worked really well was breathing techniques. There's tons of different ones out there that's easy to find one that works for you, whether it's 4 in, hold for 4, 4 out, box breathing. Maybe it's breathe in deeply, hold your breath and breathe in again, and then exhale it all out. All those things would reduce my stress going to calls, which allowed me to focus on the call itself and handle it a lot quicker, a lot more presently without being stressed about what's going to happen. I could focus on the event at hand. And then finally, you have to be consistent in these things. I know we talked about it with fitness. It's hard to do these things in order, but with consistency, developing those personal routines after shifts, for me, it was I'd go to the gym before my shift every day. I'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning, go work out for an hour, come back, get ready, go into work. That was just the start of my day, but it helped kind of ease my mind into what's going on and help me focus on what was coming up. And then at the end of the day, I'd come back home from work, make dinner, and I was so tired from a 12-hour shift plus working out early in the morning that I would sleep for the 6, 7, 8 hours that I needed before going back into work that next day. And finally, we do need to be able to talk about these things. I can tell you that when I first started, the shift I was assigned to was all senior officers, which they're all great guys, but I was a brand new officer with about 1 year of experience, and pretty much everyone else on the shift had 10 plus years of experience. And there was really no guidance on how to handle critical incidents. It was suck it up, we're not going to talk about it, go on to the next call. And that doesn't really work. And then I moved to a different department where there was an officer in field training who was involved in an OIS, and it was just kind of my point to talk to him and say, hey, it's okay to go with, to deal with what you're going through, talk about it. You don't have to talk about it directly, but keeping it bottled up inside and not telling anybody about it will not be beneficial for you. And we still keep in contact pretty much on a weekly basis. But talking to even a peer or your family members, which you don't have to give them the gritty details of what happened at work that day, but just telling them, hey, it was a rough day, we had some really bad things happen, opening up and being vulnerable about those things can really help ease some of those stressors.
Wow, yeah.
Andy, is there anything I missed, maybe poor coping methods that you want to talk about?
When it falls to yourself, you have to take charge. That's about the only way to try to get in front of potential issues. Something like I said, I talked to my trainees about, or even on family night when I was a sergeant at the academy, and it's the 3 F's, faith, family, and friends. They're all great resources. They can all help keep you grounded. They can all be a good ear that'll listen. And sometimes you might need to be the ear to listen, to your family and friends. But if you look at faith, family, and friends, it kind of gives you that triangle of support. That gives you you find someone that you can talk to out of that group. You need to engage others outside of work, especially with your family and your friends, because you don't want to let your entire identity be just cop. It can consume who you think you are. I think there's a good spot in the book that talks about we're one of the few professions that gets introduced at parties by our profession. Yeah, I want you to meet Chase, he's a cop. I want you to meet Andy, he's a cop. It's not like I want you to meet so-and-so, this is where they work. We always get it. So that really becomes our identity and consumes us 24/7. And there needs to be that disconnect where you can kind of reset and come back in there. And you can usually, I found those through the 3 F's is what helped keep me grounded and tried to be that proactive stress management for me.
That's great. Thank you, Andy and Chase. And Andy, what you just shared is a great lead into our next topic we're going to cover. We're going to talk about hypervigilance and enjoying life outside of work. So I think one of the challenges it seems like that's specific to law enforcement is the exact things that can keep you safe on the job can cause you a lot of unnecessary stress outside of work. So you've got the combination of training and job expectations and this chronic exposure to stress, and it can leave you in a state of sort of hyper awareness and hyper alertness even after your shift. So it can become a challenge to disengage from that, your police role, and actually enjoy your personal time. So I know, Andy, you've had a long career, you've got a ton of experience, and I think you've got a lot to share about finding this balance and ways to enjoy life outside of work, strategies that can maybe work for our audience today.
Yeah, I mean, it's about trying to let your guard down. I mean, we're taught in the academy early on, all the way through officer safety, officer of safety, officer safety. You never know when that car stop's going to be the one that's really going to challenge your skills to survive. Right. So we're always taught to not put our back to the door, be aware of your surroundings. And I know that doesn't go away. My wife and daughters wanted to go down to the Strip for New Year's Eve one night when I was working. I worked the year before last, and I'm like, all right, well, know where your car's parked, know where the closest fire station is, have an escape route. It's hard. You're always constantly thinking to be prepared for the worst. So when you're off, it's hard to let it down. How I did it for me is, I tried to enjoy life outside of work. I took on coaching girls fast pitch softball. Like I said, my wife and I have triplet daughters, so it was easy for us to get involved and start coaching. And I coached for over 18 years. One, it got me outside. It provided me some good exercise. We're out there on the field, moving around, hitting balls, and a chance to interact with community members on a completely different level, where I could let my guard down out there, on the dirt or the grass, and just be engaged. I was able to travel with my family. And at the same time, I got to help a bunch of other young ladies pursue their dreams of becoming student athletes and move on to the next level and play, softball in college and get an education. And so it really helped me as I gave others a sense of success. It gave me a sense of accomplishment. You don't have to coach. It can be golfing, camping, fishing, or even the new sport that I see everybody doing, pickleball. That we're putting up those courts. Whatever it is to get out and have some fun and get some exercise. I can tell you that I kind of stopped coaching for the last couple of years to pursue my master's, and my wife and I are already talking about going back, just because it allows us to interact with those in a whole different level, and it really does, I think, de-stress and help me get the guard down. Something that worked out great for me was, create a calendar for activities or things you want to do when you're off. Put it on the calendar just like you would a doctor's appointment. Here's when I want to go camping, or here's when I want to go to the park and throw the Frisbee around. I know when we first started our career, my wife was on graveyard as a dispatcher, and I was a graveyard on patrol. We'd go fishing at a local pond about 0800 in the morning. And this was before we had kids. It just was a chance for us to kind of go down and talk about it, distressed, and then we'd be able to go home and go to sleep. But we put it on the calendar. And so I just think that you really got to make time for it. Let's see, Chase, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that one.
No, those are great points. That's actually something I utilized as well, as setting events on my calendar so that I would be forced to do them on my day off. Only because I'm committed to things. I don't like being late for things. I don't like dropping out on things if I promise to do it. That's just who I am as a person. And I think we've talked about this before, Andy, but one thing we don't like to do as law enforcement officers when we're off is make a decision. It's, oh, I don't care. You pick. I don't know. I don't want to do that. You've made decisions for 12 straight hours solving everyone else's problems. You don't want to come home and have to solve your own problems. It's just exhausting, right? So one thing that, again, worked for me, just like you, is setting things on my calendar. For me, as you probably can see in my background, I'm a diehard Gamecock fan. I went to Carolina. I love going to Carolina sporting events. I'm a little far now, about an hour and a half from the university, but it's not anything to find me at a football game, which is contrary to how you'd usually feel when you're hypervigilant, is being surrounded by 80,000 people. Other big thing for me is, the Vegas nights, right? No one wants to be surrounded by people typically, but doing the things you enjoy and not losing that sense of identity is huge. A big thing for me is hiking. A big thing for me is music. My music seems a little more metal and hardcore, so you're in a mosh pit surrounded by people, not typically where you'd want to be if you're a law enforcement officer. But when I became a cop and felt like I needed to move away from those things, I lost my sense of identity, and it made it a lot harder for me to cope and find kind of happiness outside of work. And therefore, I kind of just continued to embed myself in my job, which quickly led to burnout over the years.
Wow. Yeah, thank you both for sharing. So our last topic today we're gonna cover is emotional survival and developing your personal support network. So wanted to talk about this. So the job, it sounds like the job is the job. You're going to confront high stress, high stakes situations. It's consistently challenging. But I think the idea that you still have a choice is a valuable one. We've looked at this like just surviving, viewing work and personal time as things to be endured just until you can retire, or thriving, which is implementing practices that can empower you to view day-to-day life as something you could have some control over and can enjoy throughout your career. And I know from speaking with Andy that he's got sort of a unique perspective on this that I think would be really valuable for our audience to hear today.
Thanks, Bill. Heard a lot of folks say that the job is a stressful job. The profession is very, very stressful. However, my approach was to try to look at it as a job is not stressful. I'm exposed to stressful situations, and sometimes, many times throughout the day, but it's how I handle those stressful situations that can kind of set me up for success. And it's about, preparation. If it's training on your own time, reviewing case law, being prepared, walking through some scenario-based training with your supervisor or your squad mates, having conversations at home. It's just that mental or crisis rehearsal, so to speak. There's a Vons not too far from my house outside the gate here, and that poor store has been probably robbed, or the video poker machine lady, the change girl there, has probably been robbed 40 times in my head. That's all in my head, though. I'm in the store, it happens. I'm with my wife and kids. What do I do? I'm with just my wife. What do I do? I'm armed. What do I do? I'm unarmed. What do I do? They just come in and they go out. Do I become a good witness to get information? They start shooting. What do I do? And it's just those crisis rehearsals. And I've had some many critical incidents over the last 27 and a half years. And sometimes at the conclusion, you're done. It's almost like, wow, that's over. And this is the course that I took. So I just think if you look at it as there's stressful situations and how do you prepare for those, and that's through crisis rehearsal, thinking about your actions and what you're going to do, you'll be able to survive. And that's kind of, and then taking on additional roles of trying to move from that survive to that thrive. Obviously, yes, I did look forward to completing a full career and getting a retirement and a pension, which is really, really nice. But I can tell you, there's a lot of things I miss. I miss, the teamwork, being around the guys, talking, hearing stories from the guys and gals in the office. But I also went back to school. I went back to school because I wanted to get my bachelor's before my daughters did. And then my daughter challenged me to work on my master's with her. So I've always found something else to add on top of it to try to thrive. And that was while I was still working for the police department. So it's just your approach, the approach that you've got to take on there. So crisis rehearsal is the one what I would recommend.
Yeah.
I'd love to add to that, Andy, if there's time.
Yeah, please do.
I think my perception of this was I just wanted to survive my 28 years. And I'd like to believe that's part of why I quickly left law enforcement after 7.5 years, and didn't really want to make it any further after that. I thought, it would be better off for my family life if I wasn't in it anymore. And there's a really good point in the Emotional Survival book where Kevin Gilmartin talks about not letting the job define you, not letting the role you have at the agency define you. I could be a canine handler one day and I walk in and the chief says, that's not your job anymore, and takes the dog away from you. And I read that about year 5 when I was in law enforcement, and it was really eye-opening of, it doesn't have to be who I am anymore. It's not the job that defines me. I am my own person. And, changing your mindset of how you approach law enforcement can be huge. And I think looking back, I would have loved to have that book when I first started out as a recruit.
Wow. Yeah. That's great. Thank you both for sharing that. So we're going to move on to a Q&A now. So I just, first of all, want to thank you, Andy. I want to thank you, Chase, for sharing all of your expertise thus far, your personal stories. It's been a pleasure for me to listen to. I'm sure it's been a pleasure for the audience to listen to as well. There's been a ton of valuable information shared. So just for the audience, if you have any questions, hopefully you've sent them throughout. If not, try to pop them in now, but I believe we have a couple thus far that Vanessa is going to take us through for both Andy and Chase here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with Andy. Since you held position as lieutenant and had direct reports, what are some tips that you have to encourage those direct reports to adapt such strategies that we've discussed today or different habits in their lives?
I mean, I was a parent, a father, and I think it's somewhat similar as you look at that. Those that report to you, just like your kids, are going to look up to you. They're going to look at your actions, what you do, how you walk. It's not just what you say. So setting the example. But you've got to be engaged as a leader. You have to be engaged with the folks below you. Simple conversations, just walking through the bullpen, if they're hanging out and you just pull a chair up and talk to them, and they're going to remember that. How are you doing? How's it going? Hey, I see the picture. Or if you knew their kid had a birthday and you start having a conversation, it makes them feel a sense of self-worth as well. That kind of removes them from the job a little bit. So it just, remember that you're always going to have eyes on you, and be that person that's out there engaged, talking to them and finding out what they've got going on. You might get some information and realize that you've made a significant influence or difference for somebody and redirected them if they're at that 5 to 7 years. We saw the survey early on, 45% in this group, and that's exactly where I was at, and I guarantee it's a good chunk. Not maybe looking to leave, but that cynicism starts to come in of us versus them, or that. So understand those employees. If you have employees 5 to 7 years mark on there, be engaged with them, talk with them. That's somewhere you can, a place you can start.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's super important. And then we'll link this to our last question. We'll direct this to Chase. But if you were to start your career again, is there something you've learned since that you would implement this time around?
If I was to start my career again, what would I change? I think the biggest thing I would probably harp on any new officer is slow it down. I know everyone wants to get off patrol and get into the fun details or get into the fun assignments, right? We want to work a dog. We want to go to investigations. I was all for that. I was buried in my work. I was on SWAT. I was a drug recognition expert. I was an SFST instructor. I was a canine handler. I did everything I could possibly get my hands on. And we were also a fire department. So then add in any kind of responsibility I could have had at the fire department as well. So swift water rescue, technical rescue, large animal rescue. I just wanted to have my hand in everything. And I wore a lot of different hats. And that's kind of why I said, I feel like I did 15 years worth of work that quickly, because I was working so much and I lost a lot of what I could do outside of work. And I would just harp to anyone listening that it's okay to slow it down. It's okay to take some time and really learn the position before you move on to something else. I think looking back, getting a dog at year 5 was a great time frame for me. But if I was going to move on to investigations or a supervisory position, I would really want to have had 10 plus years on the road before I ever really started to make that change, just because I would have learned the job a little bit better. And it's okay to progress slowly. You don't have to be the quickest to every position.
Awesome. I think that is a great place to end. We want to make sure that we leave you guys with some resources. So as we've mentioned throughout the presentation, we do have the title and author of the book we've been referencing, The Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. That is available online or on Amazon. So if that's something you're interested in, you can find it online. And then as far as some resources that we provide, we have a free report that William here wrote. It is our What Does It Take to Sustain a Law Enforcement Career Today. So feel free to download this when we send out the resources tomorrow. We also have a free guide with some key 3 stress management exercises that you can share with your reports. You can do yourself, but those are super helpful, I think, to decompress and find that time. And then finally, we have our own product called Powerline that does help with stress management. It is kind of a self-service portal to help people get the resources they need to help them throughout their career and help them through different situations. So we'd love to talk more about obviously our products with you. If you're interested or have any questions about this presentation, you can reach out to our team. Again, you'll get the presentation and recording tomorrow. But other than that, I think that's all we have for you guys today. We're super grateful to have Andy and Chase and William along to discuss these very important topics. So thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a great day.